I'm Elisa Bieletich-Davis, and this is Everyday Orthodox. You know, we get together here on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. Yeah, our church is a little divided up here in North America. We're worshiping different jurisdictions, different languages sometimes, different calendars sometimes, and we're spread out. Right? So even if you knew all the Orthodox people in your town, there are a whole lot of other towns and a whole lot of other regions and lots of people to meet. So, we talk a lot about Orthodox unity. And usually by that we mean, which bishop is making the decisions. But maybe unity is really about knowing one another and loving one another and caring about one another. So I figure that's what our project is here. We're working on church unity, one person at a time by just getting to know each other. And, if you're in the Greek church, now you know some people in the Antiochian church, or you know somebody across the country, and you see they're Orthodox just like you, and they've got some interesting things going on as well. So here we are. Of course, we've got Mike in the studio in Chesterton. Also, well, actually now Simon's in the Chesterton studio as well. They're both live from Chesterton, producing the program, and I'm here in Texas. And all right, we have a great guest for you this day. Oh, wait, I have to tell you, we're on Facebook Live. We're on the Ancient Faith app and the Ancient Faith website, but we're also on YouTube, which is super fun. So you can hear the show just audio if you like, either live or as a podcast on Ancient Faith, or you can watch us live on YouTube, or you can watch us recorded on YouTube because the old episodes are there too. So whatever you prefer, do your thing, but we're all over the place. So, okay, tonight's guest, I'm really excited. Matt's wife came on the program a while back, and we said, we're going to have to interview your husband too, right? So Clarissa Murray was on the show last August, in August of 2024. And we talked a little bit about her husband, and I was like, he sounds great. Bring him on. So Matt Murray is on the show tonight. Now, he grew up in what he called a city in a forest, which is totally accurate for Atlanta, right? It's a big city, but you're also like always right on the edge of the forest. And he's the oldest of 4 brothers. And, so they grew up in the city, but they also loved hiking and being out in nature. His dad was a Southern Baptist preacher, and his mom's an author. And so he grew up, as an athlete physically, but also as a spiritual athlete. He's he thinks a lot about the faith. He thinks a lot about Christ. He thinks a lot about what's the best way to worship him. And so he became a filmmaker initially. Actually, he was really interested in filmmaking. He went to film school, and he sort of worked his way around and became a stunt man, and now the coordinator of stunts. And so it's pretty cool. It's a pretty interesting story, and I'm looking forward to hearing it. And of course, along the way, they found their way into Orthodoxy, which is always like almost a miracle here in the United States that anyone would find the Orthodox Church and figure out what it was and be able to walk into something so different and find God there. Thank God. So without any further ado, Matt, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I have to make a very quick correction. I'm not a stunt coordinator. I'm not a stunt coordinator. I might be in the future. I'm part of the stunt design team. So I come in with a team. There's a difference between
these things.
Yeah. The coordinator is kind of like the boss of the stunt department. And then in bigger movies, they have, departments where they have teams within that team that the coordinator coordinates. You have a fight team, you have a wire team, you'll have a fire team for fire. And I fall into that mainly in the category of wire stunts, but started off as a stunt man, mainly doing fights and stuff like that, and then got into a lot of other things. So yeah, stunt coordinator is where I hope to be when I get closer to my 50s. So
gotcha. Yeah. Okay, so stunt coordinator is really managing people and getting the whole crowd together and making sure that it all comes together. But you're designing stunts, which is like figuring out, how are we going to do this? How is it possible to drop a guy out of a sky and not hurt him and not hurt anybody else? And that's cool. That's really neat. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. See, I don't know a lot about the industry, so I'm learning a little bit more. I like it. But
I like to say, if you watch a football game, the stunt coordinator is the coach. And then he's got like his defensive coordinator and his offensive coordinator. And then you have the guy like with the iPad that's like, or the playbook. I tend to be like the guy with the playbook that's like, hey, remember this play, or let's try that play, or which one do you want to do? Or they'll come to me and see like, what was that play we did before? And I'm like, all right, here it is. So, so that's kind of a cool picture of what we do. So
that's pretty neat. Actually, it sounds like kind of a cool role to be playing. Actually, it is. It's really neat. All right. Well, cool. Well, welcome to the program, Matt. It's good to have you.
I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
Well, so you grew up in Atlanta. Tell me a little bit about that, about your childhood, and your dad was a Baptist preacher. So I'm not even going to ask, were you active in the church? I'm going to assume that you were in the Baptist church all the time. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So my dad, of blessed memory, he was really good at like one-on-one interaction. So he loved small churches. He used to say, he doesn't want to be in a big church because he wants to be able to know everybody in his church. And so I kind of grew up. I was born actually in Fort Worth, Texas, when my dad was in seminary. My dad grew up in Atlanta. My mom grew up in Nashville. They met in college here in Atlanta. They went to seminary. I was born there, and then we moved back here to Atlanta, where my dad was kind of like a pastoral assistant for a while. And then I think the first church he actually preached in was in Pennsylvania. We lived in Pennsylvania for 5 years. So kind of the formative, like adolescent years of my life were up in Pennsylvania. We moved back to Atlanta when I was 12. But I was the typical rebellious American preacher's kid. I grew up believing in God, but I also grew up, I think, with a lot of pressure as a preacher's son that I had to be a certain way, and my personality. And rebellious is the word that was used most of my life. It wasn't until a few years ago that I realized that I was really just adventurous. I loved adventure. And, adventure involves going out past the boundaries. So for people that aren't adventurous, adventurous people look like rebels. And I definitely towed the line between the two, because I think people told me I was a rebel, not my mom and dad, but what you have children, they pick up everything. They hear everything. I can be in a conversation with my wife and see my daughter like looking around the corner to hear what we're talking about, so, but I grew up, my dad was was a very pious person. And he, all the way until the end, and just really loved that one-on-one interaction. And even through my rebellion, my rebellion lasted, or my adventurism lasted a very long time. I got into a lot of things that I shouldn't have gotten into. And it was really kind of the seeds that my mom and my dad planted in me that took a very long time to start to grow. But I also think that I was a big risk taker because I had a big safety net. I knew that my parents could rescue me, so I was willing to take more risks and do things. And I probably exploited that too much. But I also suffered some things that are very unique for young kids. I went through some trauma at a young age that led to some other trauma at a very young age that now with nephews and nieces that are older than I was when I had that trauma, I look at them and go, man, I was just a baby when I was getting into some things that I had no business getting into. And, and today I used to have a magnet on my refrigerator that it's never too late to have a happy childhood, because I think I grew up way, way, way too fast. And I think trauma does that to people, yeah, but it was very interesting. My dad and I had deep theological conversations at his his memorial service. I gave a eulogy. Me and all my brothers gave eulogies, and I said that he was like, we were throwing catch with theological things when I was growing up. Like we didn't throw a baseball in the front yard. We'd have like theological debates, and I would ask him questions, and it was really unique because when I became Orthodox, it was like, Dad, I found all the answers to these questions, because my dad was really good at listening and very good at asking thought-provoking questions. So I would ask a question. He wouldn't give me an answer. He'd give me a question to think about, to try to find the answer, I think. And that was a wonderful thing. It was integral to our conversion. And I don't know, I know my mom knows this now. I don't know if my dad and I had this conversation before he passed away, because I really wanted him to know that because obviously as converts, when we start converting, we're like, everything we learned was wrong, everything now is right, and that comes off to Protestants as, you're wrong, you taught me the wrong thing, and he didn't. He taught me to look for the truth, and we found it in the Orthodox Church. That's not to say that people don't find it other places, but that's where we found it.
Right.
And I was probably a bit too pushy with what we found when we found it. I've tried to back off a bit now, but yeah, that was a very dynamic relationship over that process. Also, when we converted, my dad had retired from preaching for about a decade. And so I really would be curious how he would have reacted to Orthodoxy had he found out about it while he was still a pastor. He came to our daughter's baptism. He came to all of our children's baptism. And during one of the baptisms, he came up to me afterwards. He goes, I feel like I've been doing it wrong all these years, like watching an Orthodox, because it's a big deal, but at that point in time, like, he's not baptizing people anymore, so it's just more of, and he knew Greek, he could read Greek. So we're at a big Greek cathedral where, it really only half of it's in Greek, but if you're American and you only speak English, even the English sounds like it's Greek. He would be sitting there reading the liturgy book, he would know what was being said. I think too, for my wife and I, had somebody, when we were plugged into the church that we left, that sent us on our journey, if somebody had come up to us and been like, hey, there's this really cool church I want you to come visit called an Orthodox Church. Do you want to come see it? I think we would have reacted differently too. So, God's timing is outside of time, so that's,
it's really true, right? Like, it depends on where your mind is at the time and where your heart is at the time. And I definitely know, like, I had a few encounters with Orthodoxy and I didn't like it at all. And then all of a sudden one day I loved it. Right. And it's just like, it sort of depends. It depends on what you're thinking about and where your mind is and whether you're open to it at that moment. And for sure, I was I was like, what? This is so dark and all these faces everywhere. And, this guy told me I had to cover my head. I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? I got to get out of here. But at any rate, I think it's really interesting, this idea that, when we first come into the church, we can be so frustrated about all those years we lost doing something else. And we're not good necessarily. I'm sure some people are. I was not good at expressing that in a way that was not offensive to the people around me.
Well, I'm the oldest of four boys, and I was a fighter, and my dad had a PhD in theology. So I love a good, conversations lead to debates and debates lead to fights. I mean, you never beat anybody into a position, so, but at the same time, it was really hard because we were experiencing these things that we wanted to share with everybody. And people that, like, my family had been hearing our distress for years, and then we'd find all these answers and we'd bring it to them. And I don't know if this is how they were, but how it felt to us was like, oh, good, good for you. And that wasn't true the whole time. I mean, we're talking about a span of time, there were definitely things. I mean, my sister-in-law pointed out, like, because my wife and I had this laundry list of things we wanted in a church. We had been searching for a church for 5 years, which I like to tell people just means we were judging churches for 5 years.
Right.
Go to a church, go to a church, go to a church. Then we drive home and talk about everything we didn't like about it and what's wrong with it. The couple churches we'd settled in for a little while, and then we'd leave and settle in and leave. But so we had kind of accumulated this long list of, like, little things that we wanted in a church. And my wife and I got in a fight one day because she was like, we're never going to find it. And I'm like, we're in the Bible Belt. There's, we can come up with something. She's like, no, they only have coffee, they only have coffee shops and concerts, and, they don't have what we're looking for. And I was like, yeah. I was like, well, I think they do. And to make our list even more complicated, the church needs to have blue walls. I don't know if she told that story, but I said, it's got to have blue walls. She was like, yeah. And
you're like, I'm going to really make this, like, we're going to throw in details here so that we know God's really speaking to us. And also just to be difficult and frustrate each other.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like any good marriage. And I mean, literally the first time I went to an Orthodox church, I brought back these pictures, and it was like I had entered I just had never been anywhere like it before. And I sent a picture, or we were at a dinner or something with my family, and my sister-in-law was like, oh, look, it has blue walls. Because they have these huge, at our cathedral, they have these huge, like 10 by, I don't know, 20 mosaic icons, and they all have blue sky in them. And so there were blue walls there, and my wife was like, huh, yeah, well, yeah. But I mean, there's just so many things you couldn't, there's so many coincidences that happen along the way that you just can't deny that something happened, and it's still happening for us, which is beautiful. But it's been hard too. It's very hard. It's still hard. It's not something that's easy to do, to take what you grew up with, to take your understanding. So that's one thing that I definitely inherited from my dad. My dad was not talkative. I'm very talkative. I'm like my mom in that regard. But my dad was really good at taking in information and changing his mind if he thought that information was relevant. There are a lot of things throughout his life that he would research it, he'd look into it, and afterwards it would change him regardless. Whether or not he ended up agreeing with it, I think he knew that it just would change him to do his homework and do his due diligence and research it. And that was something that he did constantly, and I learned from him. I mean, that's something that I have to do for my career. I mean, if we were making my movie when I show up, then it wouldn't be good. But also, like, we'd just be telling my story, and it's not my story. It's the director's story. It's a writer's story, and I have to be willing to change. And it's frequent. We put something together, we design it, and we give it, and then it comes back, and they go, no, change this, change this, change this, and my dad was really good at doing that. I think most athletes are really good at doing that because they grow up learning that, the only thing that's going to change anything is them.
Right. Being coachable, right? Like that's one of the best. You could be a really, really talented person. If you're not coachable, it's not going to work, right? Because you really need that coordination of the whole team is really important. And if you're a person who can't be coordinated, like what's going to happen? But it is that kind of intellectual curiosity and that humility, that willingness to change your mind. It's also critical. It was interesting. I think it was Mother Christophora. Maybe it was somebody else. It was another nun. There was a nun talking one time, and
They're pretty wise.
They are very wise, right? They're very wise. And she was talking about this idea that you have to work really hard on the things that you're doing, but you also can't be too attached to the outcome. Like this idea that, like you're saying, right? Like you walk in with your movie or you walk in with your idea about how things should be done, but you have to be willing to just sort of drop that and do the thing that's needed. And, and it's like that with God, that sometimes you're the Samaritan on the road and you think you know where you're going. And then there's this guy on the side of the road and you got to stop and take care of him and take him to the inn. And, there are a lot of ways in which God intervenes in our plans, and we have to be able to adjust like that. That's interesting. But I think it's the same thing. And it's academics and it's athletes and filmmakers and everybody, anyone who's doing anything collaborative. And anything good in the Christian universe is always collaborative. It's always the energy with the Spirit working through everybody. So that's really neat. Yeah. That's very cool. But so, all right. So your dad, he's flexible in that sense, but he didn't become Orthodox, right? Like he stayed Baptist to the end of his days.
No, he didn't stay Baptist.
No, what happened?
There's a caveat there. So my dad, when he passed away, his funeral, and I want to spell this out clearly because I don't want to get my priest in trouble. his funeral was done by 2 Anglican priests and an Orthodox priest. However, very clearly, the Orthodox priest did the Trisagion on his own, separate, but he met with the Anglican priest. So my mom and dad, I said at his eulogy that, if you had met him in his 20s, he was a right-leaning, Bible-beating Southern Baptist. And if you met him in his 50s, he was a left-leaning, Anglican. And that's, they were part of it. My mom is still a part of this Anglican church. And I mean, that doesn't have anything to do with us. And I think that, so it was unsettling. I don't know how unsettling it was for him, but it was unsettling for me to learn about Eastern Orthodoxy. It's like being a martial artist your entire life and studying martial arts and seeing it in movies and never knowing that Kung Fu existed. Here's this ancient martial art that has weapons, it has hand-to-hand combat styles, it has beautiful kata forms to show the arts and flow. It has, spiritualism mixed into it. It has a cinematic version of it. It has a practical application, a non-practical, and, Buddhists practice it and all this stuff. And I've been doing boxing my whole life and been doing karate and never knew that there's this 2,000-year-old tradition that exists. It's like I think Orthodox, it's not as much anymore because of shows like yours and because of the internet, but Orthodoxy was this huge blind spot for us, and it was for my dad too. As far as I don't want to say with 100% certainty. I remember, and my wife remembers my dad saying he didn't know what Orthodoxy was when we found it. If he did know what it was, he didn't know anything about it because when we started converting, he started asking for books about it. And he had a PhD in biblical studies and knew how to knew Greek. And it's like this blind spot. Like my wife and I still talk about this now. Like, I don't know how I missed all of this stuff before. And I think it's the Great Wall of Roman Catholicism, in my personal opinion. But, I think that anytime I saw, somebody doing Kung Fu, I called them boxers, like the British did when they went to China, right? They were like, oh, they're boxers because we just know what boxing is. So anytime a Protestant would see somebody in vestments or incense or anything like that, they'd be like, oh, they must be Catholic. So I don't want to say 100% that my dad didn't know what Orthodoxy existed, but he definitely didn't know what it was as far as a theology. And my mom even has said to me, she realized like she grew up just thinking that the Southern Baptist Church she grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, like everybody just believed that. And the reality was she found out, because she's Anglican now, like that was a very small piece of a massive theology and faith. I remember one of our pastors at a church we went to when we were Protestant saying, oh, there's 20,000 different denominations. And if only one of them's right, then all of us are going to go to hell. And I think he's right if he's right about the Western view of salvation. I think he's wrong if he takes in the Eastern. And that's something that we now we've kind of honed. I don't want to say we've honed our skills, but we've kind of zeroed in on when we have conversations with family, because it seemed like we were always talking past each other. We talk about things like justification. We talk about things about, works-based salvation, which, to be honest with you, we already talked about this. Everything in life is works-based salvation. I mean, I go to the gym to work out, to get healthy. I don't just sit at home and read books about exercises, and so, but I guess I thought that was true before we were Orthodox. So, for me, there's kind of a base that I lay out, and I think I got this way because of my dad. My dad loved using analogies and metaphors. He also loved drawing pictures and diagrams, and he also just kind of loved making some ground rules. And so I think we've kind of found now that like some ground rules for this discussion is, what I believe about salvation is different than what you believe. So if you come to our church and you look at our church through the lens of faith alone, then we are the most rigorous, and you think that faith, that we think it's just works based, then you got to think we're the most legalistic thing in existence. My spiritual father had gone back to Greece not long after we converted and came back and said, I want to ask a question. I said, what's that? He goes, well, I was meeting with a nun who I really love. She's a friend of mine. And I asked her, are Protestants, are they heretics? And she said, absolutely. And he said, what do you think about that? I said, well, if I think that salvation is just what I believe, then if I were to hear you say that, she's saying I'm going to hell. And I said, if you were to ask her, does she think Protestants are going to hell? What would she say? He was like, well, she would say, she doesn't know. It's not up to her. I was like, well, that's the difference, right? For me to call you a heretic is me saying you're going to hell. When the reality is heretics just saying you're following the wrong teaching, So we never called anybody in my family heretics, but we probably sounded like we were calling them heretics a lot because we were talking past each other. And that's not what we were trying to say. The other issue too is just pride. I mean, my pride, all of a sudden finding the fullness of faith, it's like I'm walking around like, I got everything figured out all of a sudden, and I don't, I might have the best workout plan in the universe, but I can barely do it once a week. Whereas my brother might have the easiest workout in the world, but he's doing it 6 days a week, so, and he's doing it for the same reason I'm doing it, which is that he loves God. I have to keep in mind too, that, there's times when I was like, oh, I pushed my family away. I pushed my dad away from the Orthodox Church. And that's pride. That's me thinking that I have that much of an influence on my dad. I mean, I definitely do, but I'm not his mentor. Not as my dad's spiritual father. I'm just his son. And so to finish that line of thought, my dad was planning on getting cremated. And about a year before he passed away, he said, what do the Orthodox think about cremation? And we had kind of reached an impasse, right, with each other, where I had just kind of said, I don't really want to have these conversations anymore. My pride was the issue. It wasn't my dad. It was me just feeling like I can't win and I'm not winning. So what's the point, right? And I told my dad, I said, well, there's a really good book on it. It's called A Christian Ending. Why don't you read the book? And he took the book and read it. And about 6 months later, he said, I'm not going to get cremated. I want a natural burial. And I have a beautiful picture of a pine wood coffin with his 9 grandchildren signing it with markers. Yeah. He wasn't embalmed. He asked me if an Orthodox priest could co-officiate his funeral. And I told him, he was in the hospital at the time. I told him I'd ask. I knew the answer, but and of course, Father Paul was like, I can come too. He can't have a burial in the church, but I can come too, which is another thing that's crazy. Yeah. It's not because my dad's not Orthodox. It's because we believe in free will. And if Father Paul brought his body into the church after he died and gave him an Orthodox funeral, he's violating my dad's free will.
Right, right.
So anyway,
if your dad wanted to be Orthodox, he had time to do it. And he chose not to do that, and we respect it.
And that doesn't mean that he's in hell burning, because he didn't, because of our view of salvation. So my dad's journey was a journey, and we played a part in his journey. And I think we played a part of he played a huge part in my journey. And I played a little part at the end of his journey. And I'm very grateful to God. I'm still playing a part. He's still playing a part in my journey. We went every memorial. We visited his grave over and over and over. I pray for him all the time. We go and visit his grave every year as a memorial. And that didn't exist for me before we were Orthodox. I don't think I ever went to my grandfather's grave again. So it definitely changed things, I think, for the better, and that's all I can ask for, just the fact that he didn't get cremated to me was like, wow, who cares you didn't convert? At least you didn't get cremated, thank God for that, So,
no, it's beautiful. And it's very friendly to want to have your priest present, right? Like that's a big deal, and it's very beautiful, and it certainly means he came to peace, and it's really to peace with your decisions, and that's the other beautiful thing about Orthodoxy is that conversation with your dad. You're allowed to continue it. You don't have to shut it down and say, "Oh, he's gone. Forget it." Yeah. You don't have to put him in another place. You can look for him here still. And so, glory be to God. Thank God.
Yeah, I like to say now he's available every time I text him or call him. So
it's really true. He has more time on his hands now. He can pray for you more. He's available more. It's really it's true. Well, we're going to take a very short break, and we're going to be right back with Matt Murray. We'll talk to you soon.
Right.
Year after Pascha, the Orthodox Church celebrates the holy myrrh bearers, who cared for Jesus' body after he was crucified. But myrrh bearing has a broader definition. It can serve as a metaphor for the practical, incarnate love to which Christ calls his followers. In The Art of Myrrh Bearing, author Elisa Bielatich Davis explores the lives of grace-filled myrrh-bearing saints in Scripture and throughout the life of the Church, offering questions for reflection in each chapter. By following the lead of compassionate saints, such as Joseph of Arimathea and Olga of Alaska, we can learn to embrace a simple and profound way of life in ever-deepening communion with Christ and with others. You can find this book at store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
Welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. I'm Elisa Bielatich Davis, and we're here tonight with Matt Murray. And we've been talking actually a lot about Matt's dad and about their relationship and about his journey to Orthodoxy, Matt's journey to Orthodoxy, Dad's journey to Anglicanism, really, ultimately. But so tell me, you're kind of rebellious. You're, the oldest of four. What did you do when you finished up school? Did you go on to study film, or did you just go crazy for a while? What did you do?
So kind of in between both. I've been to 12 different schools in my life. So combination of moving, combination of getting kicked out. I mean, I've added it up, including colleges. I went to one college. I had a scholarship for film. I lost that scholarship because I wasn't a good artist as far as physically drawing. And then after that, I spent a few years in that town just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And then I went off and finished school somewhere else. I actually have a bachelor's in entertainment business and a associate degree in film. And for me, I grew up, so for me, my transitional movie was The Goonies. I saw The Goonies when I was a teen, or when I was really young. I was I went and dug a hole in my parents' basement. And then, I've watched the behind the scenes of The Goonies and I'm like, what is this? This isn't real. I want to do that. So I really fell in love with filmmaking from a young age. I was also, I had somewhat of a violent kind of upbringing just in the neighborhood. And I mean, all boys do, or all people, I think, experience violence from a young age, unfortunately, in the world we live in. And maybe that's been throughout all of history when you think of Cain and Abel. And movies were always kind of like my disconnect from that, especially in my high school years. It was seeing what it's like in reality versus seeing what it's like on screen. And being a martial artist, I started Thai boxing when I was pretty young. I've done some different martial arts, but they don't teach you about stunts in film school. They don't teach you that this entire world exists around action. And it's for a few different reasons. I think one of the biggest reasons is, if you just think about stunts on the face value, it's like, well, what would you teach besides how to fall and how to do their stunt schools for that from a cinematic perspective. But if you ever work on a movie with a really good stunt team, we are an entire film production together. Like, I mean, we have this process called pre-visualization where we're basically shooting the action to help show the director, and then the director goes, oh, I want to change this and that, and then we go back, because you can't just walk in and start doing it. Well, you can, but it doesn't happen as much as it used to. So I'm jumping around in time, but I grew up just living an adventurous lifestyle. I think when I was born, the doctor cut me on my face trying to, extract me. So I had a scar on my face when I was born. When I was 4 or 5, I got my mom's car in neutral and drove it down our driveway across the street and into another house. And then when I was 11, I poured gasoline down one of those playground twisty slides and set it on fire and then slid down it. So I started doing stunts at a young age. If you meet stunt guys or stunt women and you talk to them, almost all of them have stories like that too, which is what's hilarious about it, because
wow.
they all just did crazy things. So yeah, for me, transitioning into filmmaking, as soon as I saw stunts, I was like, this is where I want to be, because you don't, growing up, I'm like, I want to be, Jackie Chan or Tom Cruise or Van Damme or whatever,
Sure.
All of those guys have stunt doubles that at the very least figure out how to do it for them,
Right.
Or do just the unglorious stuff. We need somebody to go through a glass table. Well, let's not use the actor for that. We'll use them jumping off of a building where you see their face, and then when they slip and land on their shoulder, we'll use a stunt double. So getting into filmmaking, I was like, that's where I want to be. Film, they say it takes a village. I like to tell people there's every job you can think of. I like to do this at parties, like name a profession. Go ahead and name a profession.
Right.
So,
I can't think of one that wouldn't be, right? Because it's like anything financial, anything like executive and planning, anything costumes, makeup. There's all sorts of stuff, right? There's food there's catering.
Yeah.
There's
everything.
It's crazy. Yeah. I have a daughter who's really interested in film, and it is interesting because I think you're right. You come in being interested like in the product sort of and in what you see as a kid on screen. And then as you get into it, it's like, oh, this is a huge complex world, and there are a million different places.
And that might be judgment. It is judgmental, but it's also just the way the industry works.
It's also discernment too, right? Like you have so many days in your lifetime, and if you want to do well in your career, you got to be associated with good projects and quality outcome. And you become a regular at a place that churns out junk, then you're one of them.
Well, and I'm also, for me, I've been very fortunate that I have been able to have most of my career in Atlanta. I do travel. I haven't worked, probably 70% of my career has been here in Atlanta, maybe 60%.
Nice.
And, but I've had a lot of really good mentors that instead of me taking a fight that I did and posting it on YouTube, which I've done, I'm not saying that like I'm better than that. I've definitely done it. But I could take that fight to a stunt coordinator or a friend of mine, a mentor, and say, what do you think of this? And they can watch it and go, oh, they're more willing to give you feedback one-on-one than if you blast something on the internet that really isn't that well done. And then everybody sits there and goes, oh, that's terrible. And they never meet you and they never talk to you about it. So I like to tell people, just keep making stuff, but don't, your final product, which you put out at the very end, that's something different. That needs to be collaborative, professional, because people will judge you on it. People will watch it. They'll say things about it. They'll like it. They'll not like it. And I do, when you think about performance, and other corporations and other businesses, their performance, and this exists in the film business, the statistics of performance and blah, 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 blah. But I'm in an arts industry, and the art is on the wall, and you look at it and you go, is that good or is it not bad? And people decide if it's good or bad. But the lifestyle is the hardest part. There are a lot of people that are very talented that have gotten in the film business. And some of them I've helped get in the film business, and they left because they just don't, it's hard to raise a family on it. It's hard to to, figure out to go, hey, this week we're shopping at Aldi, and then all of a sudden next week you're shopping at Whole Foods. If you don't learn how to save your money, and then figure out how to spend your savings when you have to spend it, it can hurt a lot of people. And that's the difficult part. I think a lot of people can make a career in the film business. Everybody says they want to be a writer or director and an actor, but the reality is there's not that many positions out there for that. There's tons of positions for camera people, stunt people, lighting people, production designers, all these, painters. There's all these different things, but you got to be willing to network, to really know how to connect with people, to figure out where is the right time, when is the right time. You don't walk up to an actor to get their autograph when you're working with them. You do that at a wrap party, when they're in a casual, when they're not working, they're just hanging out with everybody. Those things you got to figure out how that etiquette works. And it's hard, but I do think that people should at least, I wish I had gone to LA and spent more time there. I've been to LA a bunch, but to actually go there and spend time there, because that is where it's like going on a pilgrimage, right? Like, I think as Christians, we should go to Jerusalem, and I'm not comparing Hollywood to these things, but it's good to know where it came from. And the people that are still making the deals are there. But the business itself is everywhere now. I mean, Georgia was the number one spot. We're not anymore. But you can go anywhere in the world now and work in the film business. Greece makes shows. Every country you can name has people doing TV shows, or it's the pride and the vanity that wants to make it in Hollywood. And if you can be happy with not having that career, then I think that you can pursue a lot more things. But there's also a place out there. I mean, not everybody out there is prideful and vain, but,
No, of course not. But it's, that idea, like, well, I don't want to make it in Atlanta. I want to make it in LA. Like, that's kind of that's the goofy part, right? But it's, but if it's really about the craft and it's about doing the work, there are a lot of places that you could be and really do well.
Well, I mean, my wife as an actress, like, she's an actress. She is a very good actress. We had a point when we were dating when I was going to see her act, and I was thinking to myself, all right, if she's not good, I have to either break up with her or figure out how to tell her to pursue something else. And I don't know if that's going to go well. Anyway, she's a good actress. There are a lot of good actresses and actors running middle school theater plays. There are a lot of good actors that just do commercials, that just do smaller productions. You really got to think, like, how am I going to make a living doing this? And if you really love it, you'll figure out a way to make a living. I'm very, very fortunate. I was right place, right time. People say that there's a lot of luck in the film business. That can all go away very quickly. It's almost gone away a bunch. It almost went away for health reasons. It almost went away for strike reasons. It's almost gone away for, wanting to change careers at one point, not really getting out of the film business, but trying to do something adjacent. So it's just one of those things that if you look at it as making a living, I meet people all the time that want to get into stunts, and then I figure out they really just want to be an actor. And I like to say, if you name like, if you name like one of the Christopher Nolan and Steven Spielberg can probably still go to the grocery store and people would just be like, they look familiar, but if you become like that superstar, your regular life is gone. You're not able to do those things anymore. It comes with a price, and you got to count that price on both ends, right? Christ said, what builder would not count the price before they start building something? And I was very fortunate that I had a great partner in the beginning that counted those costs with me, and we're still recalculating it. I mean, we're constantly going, is this still worth it? Is it not worth it? Where am I going to be when I can't, be as physical as I am now? Yeah,
well, and that's an interesting part of it, right? Like, in terms of doing the actual stunts, it's very physical. Did you end up with just a ton of broken bones? Like, and how does that work into as a career in stunt? Like, if you have a huge injury, you're just out of work for a long time, right? Like, how does all that work? I mean, I guess if you're good, you don't have injuries. Is that true, or what do you think?
No. That's definitely not true. I have a pretty good bone density. I'll just say that. But I think that I was told this early on, that stunt performers are like pro athletes. There's not many of them in their 30s. And when you're in your 30s, you're looking at the 20-year-olds going, I don't know if I want to go up against this person. The shelf life of a stuntman is longer than that, obviously. But also when it comes to injury, it's unfortunate. I mean, a lot of times we plan, like I've had surgeries that I planned around holidays. I've had other things that I've planned. Things you'll meet stunt people that have shoulder surgeries that they've been needing to get for 5 years and they just haven't gotten them. Some people will get injured and they don't want anybody to know because that means that they won't get work. It's not like, that's when it's not like a pro athlete. A pro athlete, they might get injured and never play on the field again, but at least through their injury, they're still on the payroll. And then they might get kicked off the team later, but there's a transition. For us, there's no transition. So a lot of us look into what are we going to do when we get older, in pro sports. Do you become a coach? Do you become a sports announcer? Do you become, do you open a gym? What do you do? Do you create a brand? Stunts do the same thing. We look at stunt coordinating. We look at wire design. We look at driving. I mean, you can drive a car until you're well into your 70s. And maybe even, there's stunt guys driving even older than that. So you kind of find these little extra outlets. Directing is a route. There's some very big directors right now. I mean, people who follow action know about, the John Wick directors, and the Fall Guy movie was directed by a stuntman. It is a path to directing because we are so involved in the process. The golden watch strategy, like the corporate ladder strategy, would be you start off as a really good stuntman, then you start doubling a really big actor, get their contract, and then that actor starts suggesting that you coordinate their shows, and then you start coordinating their shows, and then you start second unit directing every now and then. So they'll need another unit to go do, you would think like a hand insert, but also you do the close-up of your actor, and then you go to a big wide shot of them getting blasted through the window. You can do that another day with a smaller group of people. So then they'll start second unit directing. And then if you're lucky and you're fortunate, you'll start directing movies once you get older. And there are some people that have very, very clearly showed how that path is possible. But again, you're talking about a very small amount of jobs out there for stuntmen directors. It's more prevalent in China. They have action directors a lot more. I don't know if that's still as prevalent now as it used to be, but so there is this path that you go, but if you approach it like a pro athlete, and then you think about like how many pro athlete head coaches are there of football teams, some stunt guys get into writing, some stunt guys get into producing. We called writing what I call my wheelchair strategy. So if I ever broke my back, I love writing. We talked about my mom being an author. I'm not a professional writer, but I love storytelling and I love writing. I've always enjoyed doing it. I hate sitting down for a very long time. So if I'm forced to sit down because I broke my back, then I already have written some things, but I'd write a whole bunch more and try to sell it. It's like an alternate income. So it's not just within the window of stunts. There's a lot of different ways people go. So yeah, it's just kind of, it depends on if you hit that head on or you don't. And we started talking about that. My wife and I started talking about that in about my mid 30s. We were like, okay, where am I going next? Because I can still hit the ground. I just don't get up as fast as I used to,
Right. Yeah,
I'll pop up like, let's do this again. This is amazing. I'm like, that was it, right? We don't, if you want to go, okay, well, all right, let's do this again. It changes the older you get. So
I bet it does. Well, and it is, like you said, it's a big difference with athletes are on the payroll the whole time. But when you're doing stunt work, it's kind of piecework, right? Like you get paid for this event and then you get paid for that event. And that can be hard. That can be very hard. But all right. So tell me a little bit about your mom. Actually, you just mentioned that she was an author. What was your mom writing? What was she doing?
So my mom was a ghostwriter. That's most of what she's written.
Cool.
She wrote a book when I was in college called Long Way Off, and basically about parenting for boys and being a preacher's wife. She's a poet as well. She just had her 10-year anniversary. So I guess you call her the CEO of a nonprofit in Clarkston, Georgia, which is right outside of Stone Mountain, which is a suburb of Atlanta. So it's the refugee capital of the United States. And she has a coffee shop that employs refugees and basically helps them assimilate into American culture, helps them learn English, helps them, do paperwork, but also gives them they get paid better than Starbucks, they learn. And so she's been involved with that for 10 years now. They just had their 10-year anniversary. So she's busy. She's about to retire from that. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm pretty sure that's public information. If it's not public information, then guess what? She's about to retire. And in the next, within the next year, she's working on finding a replacement. And I think she's going to focus a lot more on her poetry and her writing.
Neat.
And I definitely inherited those wordsmithing skills from her and my dad. I mean, my dad was very, very good at writing and speaking. Obviously giving sermons,
right.
And my mom as well. My mom's a very good public speaker, and I think that getting back to the Orthodox angle of things. I mean, when we converted, I gave a talk at our church on like a Wednesday night, and at the end of it, a bunch of people asked me questions about our journey, and one yaya raised her hand and said, "So a lot of Protestants have problems with the Theotokos." She goes, "Did you have any problems with the Theotokos?" And I said, "Look, I'm a Southern Baptist preacher's son. I love my mom. I had no problem with the Theotokos. I mean, I love my mom. And I love my mom more now because I've learned how much God loves his mother than I did before we became Orthodox." And, that's one of those many blind spots that is unfortunate. I think that when I think about our journey into Orthodoxy and all the things we went through, the number one thing I think in hindsight, looking back, is it feels like all of those churches are motherless, and that's the best way I can describe where I came from. The churches we visited, I'm not saying that the churches that other Protestants are going to are that way. They may not be, but the
right.
feeling I get, the feeling we had, and looking back then, I didn't know that's what it was. Back then, I just thought, oh, it's the same thing but different, same thing but different, same thing but different. But I think what it really was is it's motherless, and to be in a church that has a mother has been so transformative for us, and I mean, it's easy to see why they think we worship Mary, because if you have that Western view of salvation, then there is no gold medal human for all of humanity, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody gets a medal, which is so fun. Everybody gets a medal. You get a medal. You get a medal. You believe in Jesus, here's a medal. But in the Orthodox faith, it's like, no, there's gold, there's silver, there's bronze, and then there's the Theotokos,
right.
who undid Eve's curse and is the most holy human that's ever existed. And she's a mom. I mean, could you imagine having that as your mother? Forget about it. And it would be, riveting. And I had a really good mother. So it takes one to know one. Like I know what a good mother looks like. So when we became Orthodox, I'm like, yeah, no problem here.
That's great.
I respect my mother, and I think other people should too. I think other people should respect Christ's mother a little bit more than they do. So yeah, my mom, I think that's a dynamic relationship still, and I love it. And I think that my love for my mom has been transferred, or not transferred, but been exemplified by my love for the Theotokos and vice versa, you know? So, yeah.
I like that. That's beautiful. And it makes sense. It really makes sense to me. I think, you know, so many of us grow up with just this sort of knee-jerk reaction to multiple things, right? And some of it saints and Mary especially, right? Just this like, it's almost like being suspicious of her, which is so crazy. And you know, so often people are like, well, why would she be so holy? And it's like, well, I mean, she lived in the temple. Her parents were very holy. Like, it's actually incredibly believable that a young woman, you know, at 14 years old could be, in fact, very, very pious and beautiful and faithful. And then God lives inside of her for 9 months. Well, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
That would be so transformative. How would you ever go back to anything else after having that kind of contact with God? It's just, and it's beautiful when you really appreciate it. And it's weird to think for how many years we didn't appreciate it or get it, you know, but it seems so obvious now.
It does. Yeah.
Well, that's
so
neat.
Clear. Yeah.
Well, I love talking to you, Matt. I love hearing about your parents in particular. Just really what a lovely experience you've had growing up and being able to have these conversations and all of this with your parents. It's really quite wonderful. But
yeah.
And you have kids too, so now you got a
I didn't
in
talk
the same
about
way.
that at all.
I know, but you talked about your role models, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, please send our love to Clarissa, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
That's great. And thank you to our audience. Thanks for joining us. Come on back next week for another Everyday Orthodox Christian. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.